I was talking to John. John's name keeps coming. Raise your hand, John. There you go. John and Kevin. There you go. There he is. There he is. If you don't know John, he graduated how many years ago?
In 2008.
2008. So he's been, ever since he graduated, he's been a part of our community through marriage classes. So if you are a couple and you're in marriage classes and you get to advanced marriage, they're the couple, along with Cody and Jessica right now, that are helping to facilitate that class. But anyway, I was talking to him, and just recognizing what a great gift it is, a great privilege and opportunity to be somebody that comes up here and shares the Word. I would have never thought that in my life. I really see it as a sacred privilege to pass on something that is so life-changing. And it is living and active, and to be given that responsibility is just overwhelming to me. So I also recognize that I dig into it in such a way whenever I pass it on, because I don't want to tell a lie. So I do my best to bring exactly what I feel like it's sharing, but what it does is it causes me to go in here, and then it does something in here within me that otherwise may not have been able to happen, because I don't know, honestly, if I would have dug in to that depth. You follow me? So I am very grateful that God gives me the opportunity, and just overwhelmed. My hope is today that I can just pass on a little smidgen, because some of the things that he gives me are just for me, and I won't share those things, but then there are other things that he asked me to pass on. And so I'm going to do my absolute best to give you just a little bit of what God gave me through his Word. The last time I spoke with you, I've been chewing on that one ever since, 1 Peter. It was a few weeks back if you were in here. Just to give a quick synopsis, 1 Peter wrote that book, and it was to the exiles that were scattered throughout the nations. They were pushed out of Jerusalem over the years, and this was about 64 AD when he wrote the book, and then they were under intense persecution. And he was trying to help them understand how you can go through the way that your life is right now with the Lord and still be a good representative in this way. So he gives them this message of hope, despite this bleak set of circumstances that they were in. He was trying to breathe like a fresh wind over them of hope and encouragement. And I think it is so powerful, because today we need that message. And so I've been chewing on that, and I did the first 7 verses. And so the last thing that I read to you in that message was verse 7. These trials have come so that the proven genuineness of your faith, of greater worth than gold, which perishes even though refined by fire, may result in praise, glory, and honor when Jesus Christ is revealed. Like he's getting them to see, look past the temporal. Look past where this thing is going. Yes, you're going through it. I mean, they were getting persecuted unlike anything that I can imagine. Maybe some of you have, but not me. I mean, Peter wrote this in 64. Let's bring everybody up to date with 68 AD. He was crucified upside down. So, I mean, there were some heavy things going on at that time. So, and he's encouraging the believers at that time. The next verse, and I was going to continue on in 1 Peter, and I am, but the next verse really just captivated me a little bit. It grabbed my heart. Let me read that to you. Verse 8, though you have not seen him, you love him. And even though you do not see him now, you believe in him and are filled with an inexpressible and glorious joy, for you are receiving the end result of your faith, the salvation of your souls. I'm going to tell you what stood out to me when he said, you are filled with an inexpressible and glorious joy. I began to think about that. Am I really filled with an inexpressible and glorious joy? I even asked my daughter, you know, if you bring the message home and you find out where things are at. We were at dinner the other night, and I asked her, 1 to 10, what kind of joy do you see emanating from me? 1, miserable, question your salvation. 10, you know, you're just full of joy, Dad. So now, you know, now I've given her the opportunity to, she said 6. Right? Oh, is that not high enough? I thought it was fair. You know, 7's always that safe place in a situation like that. It gave me a lot of room to grow. But nonetheless, I began to ponder, because here's what happened. Somebody came into my office just this week, and I'm sitting there, and I am sitting at my desk quite a bit, and open door, Jeremy. Jeremy in here? Jeremy's not in here. He asked me, he said, hey, how can I pray for you? It seems like there's a heaviness on you. So that's like when somebody says, you okay, Steve? You look a little peaked. You're like, I wasn't. I'm feeling something now. You know? And that's kind of how I felt. But as I thought about it, you know, at times I do get heavy. And I let the weight of certain situations, I let the weight of what I see going on in various places in the world, I let situations with my family overwhelm me at times. So, you know, we talked about that, and I'm going to tell you what I asked him to pray for me. I said, pray for me just being a dad. You know, that in and of itself is like, it's probably the most important thing, other than being a husband, that I get the opportunity to walk in. And it can be, you know, how do you do that? How do you do that the closest way that God would have you? But anyway, I chewed on that, and it's funny, Peter tells them, he doesn't say, hey, you could have this, he tells them. He tells them that you are experiencing what they're experiencing. You love him, you have faith, you believe, and you're filled with the joy. And that's kind of, you know, as I thought about that, I'm like, oh, Peter's just bold, you know, I love him. And so I'm wondering why, and I'm thinking that he's doing this. He's given us the standard in which a Christian life should look like. There should be love, there should be faith, and there should be joy. And it gives me an idea of what my life and where I should look at. And then when I find myself over here, and somebody walks up and says, man, you're heavy, are you doing all right? And then I'm like, okay, what is going on with me? Let me get back to the standard. You do love him. Man, I do love him. You believe in him. Even though you don't see him, you believe in him. And you are filled with an inexpressible and glorious joy. But the reality is there are moments that joy does invade my soul. And I find myself in that heavy place, and different things can burden us, as I imagine all of us do. And so as I'm putting all this together, I got a song going through my head. And typically that's what happens. The Lord begins to show me certain things, and this is an old one. It says, restore unto me the joy of my salvation, and renew a right spirit within me. Anybody know that? Right, it's like old school, right? Anybody know where that song came from? Like where it originated from? Okay, it goes on. Take not thy Holy Spirit from me. Anyway, that's enough, right? It came out of Psalm 51. In the exact words that King David wrote and prayed and asked the Lord, Lord, restore unto me the joy of my salvation. Grant me a willing spirit. Think about it. That's what we do. I was in induction this week, and that's what I'm seeing happen. Like as the guys were in there and brokenness was occurring in some of you, and you know, I could hear it, Lord, restore unto them the joy of salvation. And sometimes you go into induction because that's where things are like really fresh and good, and there's a responsiveness. Give me a willing spirit. We come here without a willing spirit, right? But that came out of, just to give a quick synopsis, David wasn't always the best king, and if you look at Psalm 51, you can read through it in its entirety. But what happened is in 2 Samuel, after he was a great king, he was a warrior. He went out, he fought with men, he killed 300 men with, all sorts of great stories about him. But for some reason, he got complacent, he decided to stay home at the palace. And he sent the warriors out to battle. And it said he woke up. You can find this in 2 Samuel 11. He woke up in the evening, he got out of bed, which tells me he was lazy and complacent, because it's the afternoon and he's getting out of bed and he's walking on the top of the palace and he sees a young woman bathing. And at that time he sent somebody to find out who she was and bring her to him. And it was Bathsheba. Matter of fact, Bathsheba was married to Uriah, who was a warrior for him in the army. He ended up sleeping with her. And she sent a message back, said, I'm pregnant. And then David got real, one sin leads to another. And he sent for Uriah. And he got him drunk. He tried to get him drunk and send him to his wife so he could play it off on, well, that's your kid. And Uriah had so much character, he wouldn't go in the house. He said, there's no way that I can go in the house and sleep with my wife when my fellow soldiers are on the battlefield. Like, that's a warrior, right? Well then, so David ended up putting him at the front of the battle, and he got killed intentionally. He tried to kill him. And then he made Bathsheba, which happened. And then he made Bathsheba his wife. In 2 Samuel 12, Nathan, who's his buddy, came up to him and confronted him through a side doorway. And David became enraged as he said, oh, I would respond in this way. He tells a little parable. And he said, oh, I would respond in this way. And he said, the man that I'm talking about is you. And then in verse, I think it's 13 or something, he says, oh, I have sinned against the Lord. And all of a sudden, just a brokenness came over him. And then he wrote Psalm 51 out of that. So some good happened, but look at this real quick. In the beginning of Psalm 51, have mercy on me, God. According to your unfailing love, according to your great compassion, blot out my transgressions. Isn't that what we do? Like it all gets exposed. Like he couldn't hide anything else. And all of it gets laid out on the table. We say, yes, Lord, that's me. It is ugly, but it's me. For I know my transgressions, and my sin is always before me. But he never specifies what the sin is. He does something pretty neat here. In verse 8 it says, let me hear joy and gladness. Let the bones you have crushed rejoice. He was broken. You understand that, don't you, State? Right? Like, Lord, let me hear joy and gladness again. Like, that's what he was focused on. He wanted that. And then in verse 10, create in me a pure heart, O God, and renew a steadfast spirit within me. Do not cast me from your presence or take your Holy Spirit from me. Restore to me the joy of your salvation and grant me a willing spirit to sustain me. I know I can identify with King David. Like, I get it. I get horrific sin. I get finding myself, when I came here, I was totally miserable. Most of us are. Most of us have been on some kind of antidepressant or something that a doctor gave us because it's supposed to help us. Well, of course we're in that spot because we're living a sinful life, so how can we have joy? Various things, that's just us trying to relate from an addictive level. But other things take away our joy as well. We're strict. We get bad news. We have health situations. I know somebody that has received some horrifying news physically. That takes away joy. Fear rises up within us. Shattered dreams. Things not happening quick enough for us. Sin, for sure, strips away joy. But the problem is that I can base my joy on situations that are taking place on the external. And we have to realize that we're like swimming upstream. As Christians, we're swimming upstream, and the world is rushing down towards us, and it's taking out anything in its path that it could get its hands on. So we're constantly like swimming in love, swimming in faith, swimming in joy. We're trying to keep that stroke up, right? And sometimes we find ourselves where the joy has dissipated, and we are lifeless, and we wonder, what's this all about? I guess my whole point and how I want to bring all this to us is because I want everybody to really answer that question. You know? Are you filled with a glorious and inexpressible joy? Where are you really at in your faith? I watch the guys, they come in here beat up, downtrodden, lit, dragging the ground, and then when you listen to them and you watch them, they're experiencing more joy. Not all of them, sometimes it takes a little while. Even in their testimonies at graduation, I've never had so much fun in my life. I always say, well, why do you want to leave? I did that. but they begin to experience life on the level that they're supposed to experience life. All right, so if I were to ask you that question, could you honestly assess yourself? And if somebody said 1 to 10, where are you at on the joy scale? Where would you be? And what's that joy based on? And I got to be careful because I can go down this road where I'm like, just be joyful, be happy. And so I'm focused on like the behavior. And it's not really what I want us to look at. I want us to look at the fact that if I focus on the right thing, it's not the external, it's not the situations, it's not the relationships, because people don't act right. People make you half crazy sometimes, right? So they're not going to give me joy. But I'm looking at the source of all this. Where am I at in the source of it all? The point that I'm trying to emphasize and what I think Peter and David are saying is this. Outside of my salvation, I have no joy. Joy is a product of the gospel, a byproduct of the gospel. And I'm not talking about, oh yeah, I'm joyful, running around. I'm steady, content, peaceful, joy, and surety. It comes out of my relationship with the Lord. Without Christ and a relationship with Him, there is no joy. There's only temporary bursts of happiness and pleasure. And we can get pleasure because that's what we pursued. We wanted to feel good. It was the quickest way possible to feel differently from what we were feeling. But what I'm talking about is just that sustenance of joy that only He can offer us. That's the cry of my heart today, because I believe if we were really honest and like all of a sudden like a number could pop up on everybody's forehead, ding, and I could see where you are on the joy scale, I probably think that most of us aren't where we could potentially be. Despite what's going on in the world, despite what's going on in our lives, despite not everything happening in the time frame that you wanted, and the wives being put back, and the kids coming soon enough, and all those things, huh, Jeremy? You know, your joy evades you. But yet you have this gift of salvation. And although you don't see Him, you love Him, and you believe if you just do what He tells you to do, something powerful is going to happen. And in that promise, you have joy. So I'm going to jump over here to John 14 to 17. I gotta try to cut some stuff out here. I would suggest that you read John 14 through 18. It's right after the Last Supper, and Jesus spends 3 chapters talking to His disciples and giving them words of life. Verse 14 through 16. Chapter 17, He prays for them. Chapter 18, He says, come on, let us go. And they go to the Garden of Gethsemane. So it's like his lap when He had His boys with Him, and He's saying, these are the things I want to tell you. And then He says, let's go. And they go out to Gethsemane, and you know what happens there. And so led the process to the crucifixion. But in the middle of all that, there is a scripture that I want to hone in on. Verse 11, chapter 15. And I'm not putting any of these up here. If you're taking notes, great. I would say go to the Word yourself and read it, and you'll see the things that I'm talking about. John 15:11. I have told you this so that my joy may be in you and that your joy may be complete. You can recognize a whole lot by the way God speaks to His people. And this is the Lord speaking to His people. This is a word of knowledge that He's talking about. I've told you these things. I've whispered truth to you so you can have joy. And it can be complete. Well, what are some things that He whispered to them? Well, real quick, if I go back to chapter 14, check it out what He says in the very first verse. Do not let your hearts be troubled. My Father's house has many rooms. If that were not so, would I have told you that I am going there to prepare a place for you? And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come back and take you to be with me, that you may also be where I am. What a word of knowledge. What a word of understanding, putting everything into perspective. Go to John 14:6. I am the way, the truth, and the life. John 14:12. Very truly I tell you, whoever believes in me will do the works I have been doing, and they will do even greater things than these because I am going to the Father. Listen, you're going to do great things. That's an encouraging word. Chris, you had a little step back, right? God's going to do great things in your life. He's the way, the truth, and the life. He's going to get your heart to captivate that and take you to places that you can't imagine. See, that should bring joy. That should bring something, some life within us. John 14:18. I will not leave you as orphans. I will come to you. Some of us feel like we're alone. He says, no, no, no. I adopt you. Justin, you're my son. I'm your father. Powerful words of truth, right? One more. Verse 27. Peace I leave with you. My peace I give you. I do not give to you as the world gives. Do not let your hearts be troubled. Don't be heavy. And do not be afraid. All encouraging words. I tell you this so that you may receive my joy and your joy will be complete. Words of knowledge that breathe joy into our heart. See, something happens. The truth of God will kill 1,000 fears. If I can stand on the truth of God. If I have the knowledge of the love of God, if I have the knowledge of the eternal covenant, if I have a knowledge of the atonement, if I have a knowledge personally when He whispers through your journals, some of you, He whispers words of truth to you. I love you. You know, two of the most powerful words that He said to me? 3. Nick, you're okay. Kept saying it to me over and over. And then I realized, I'm never okay. Like within myself, I'm just never okay with this guy. You're okay. These things I have spoken to you, that my joy might remain in you and that your joy might be full. If you go down through here, you recognize, well, they're not always words of encouragement or words of knowledge, they're words of warning. And sometimes we don't want to hear those words of warning. John 15:1 says, I am the true vine and my Father is the gardener. He cuts off every branch in me that bears no fruit. Well, every branch that does bear fruit, He prunes so that it will be even more fruitful. Wow, that doesn't sound very like, how's that going to cause me joy? I'm going to be cut off, I'm going to branch and cut off because I don't act right? But let's play the take through. Think about it. Is He a God that's just going to tell us whatever we want to hear so we feel good? Or is He going to tell us the real deal and say, Steve, I'm going to cut you off. Like enough is enough. Like He always gave the picture of me, like He grabbed a hold of me. It's like an unruly child. Right? And you tell him, and you tell him, and you tell him, and it doesn't change. And I got a good picture of my dad, because my dad wasn't afraid to lay hold of me. Not in a bad way, you know. But like sometimes you just got to and set them where you want them. Say, this is what you're going to do. It's a word of warning. And whose best interest does it have in mind but for me? And if I play that tape through all the way to the end and I go through that, will there be pruning? Will there be affliction in order to change and to bring about some shaping and molding? Absolutely. How else do I bring about the change? I tell the guys all the time, if this program wasn't hard, you wouldn't change. If we were just floating through here, one of the guys when I was in the program said, if it was Camp Run Amok, just do what you want. It's okay. Just have a good old time. We want to make you feel good. You wouldn't change. But God allows us to go through trials and adversities for a reason. And as we go through that, we experience this joy of intimacy with Him. If I'll just listen and obey, like I always think, if I would have just done what my dad told me to do when I was growing up, I would have avoided so many problems. But I knew better, right? And we do that with the Lord. Like the Lord wants us to come and do something and go through a certain situation. We say, no, I don't want to do that. I want you to stay for another year after the program. Oh, no, I want to go over here. I'm going to help out over here. Put the Lord on, sprinkle a little Lord on. But it's really not, you know it, the Lord knows it, but He goes ahead and lets you go do it. And then He allows that consequence to come through. Why? So He can get you to the place where He can actually captivate your heart in a real authentic way. Now, not everybody's supposed to be here for a year, so I'm going to jump on that. But anyway, that's the whole thing with the words of warning. He also says in here, there's some humbling words. In verse 4 and 5, chapter 15, 4 and 5, remain in me as I also remain in you. No branch can bear fruit by itself. It must remain in the vine. Neither can you bear fruit unless you remain in me. Those are words of humility. We don't like that. See, the problem is me. And the more that he can allow things to humble me, I become more pliable. And he can do with me what he so desires. But I have to understand my position. And there's been great, as I've grown in the Lord a little bit, I have a long ways to go. But man, there's something free when I have grasped the reality that, man, I'm so dependent on God. Like in and of myself, I'm going to cause a mess. But understanding that nothing can be done outside of him, it does something to us. Paul Bunyan, I say Paul Bunyan, is that right? Who wrote the Pilgrim's Progress? Or you know what I'm talking about. Yeah, Pilgrim's Progress. There's this valley of humiliation that he talks about. And he gives this picture of a shepherd boy, and he's sitting there, and he says, he that is down need fear no fall. He that is low, no pride. He that is humble ever shall have God to be his guide. God will humble us in order to get out of us what he so desires for my own best interest. And eventually through that humbling experience, I get to experience this joy that I'm talking about. I'm too high-minded. Right? Like I think I'm too special. We as men especially, we like to explain to everybody how great we are and the things that we've accomplished. And God is constantly trying to bring us to a place that, listen, you're miserable, you're poor, you're blind, you're naked. Your value is in me. And as he humbles us, some pretty powerful things take place. I'm going to wrap up. There are two other types of words. There's precious words of promise, and then there's words of precept. You know, he basically says this: you abide in me and I in you, some powerful things are going to happen. I got a plan and a purpose for you. That's what he used in my life. I got something beautiful for you. You can't see it, nor understand fully what I want to do, but I know the plans I have for you. Plans to prosper you, not to harm you. Plans to give you a hope and a future. Words like that are all wrapped up in these chapters. Then he gives us words of precept, directions. Love your neighbor. Love your wife. Lay down your life. Those are words of precept. And in that, in doing those things, I experience joy on the level that he desires me to. Everything that he has to offer, all the intangibles that he wants to give me. In that obedience. So all these words is what he's talking about when he says, these things I have spoken unto you, that my joy might remain in you, and that your joy might be full. But see, I'm still like, we walk away from this, and we hear all that, and I'm taking the scripture to try to make us come alive and help you understand that God is constantly speaking to you. Not only through your own intimate relationship with him, but through the Word. Read the Word. Let him speak to your soul. But something is still not right when I start thinking about this, because it gives you a task to do. And something's still missing. And I think of Psalm 1, it's one of my favorite Psalms. Blessed, that word is Esher, and it means happy. Blessed is the man who does not walk in the counsel of the wicked, or stand in the way of sinners, or sit in the seat of mockers, but his delight is in the law of the Lord. And on his law he meditates day and night. It's like a tree planted by streams of water, which yields its fruit in season. See, that's it. That's it. Blessed, Esher, joy, happy, delight. And do I delight in the Lord? And that's where I fall short. Somebody else did too. St. Augustine. If you can find a biography, actually he wrote a lot of books, but one of them was the Confessions that talks about his own life. Probably one of the most influential people of the history of our church, outside of Paul and Jesus. When you look back, but he wrote this Confessions that basically told his testimony, and I'm going to just pull out some of that, because he captures what I'm trying to talk about. Yes, there's joy, but there's this delighting thing. And do I delight in this relationship with the Lord? I'm just going to read some of what he wrote in this, because he struggled with this thing about delighting in the joy of the Lord. He writes, as I grew to manhood, I was inflamed with desire for an enormous amount of hell's pleasures. I went to Carthage, where I found myself in the midst of the hissing cauldron of lust. My real need was for you, my God, who are the food of the soul. I heard your voice saying, I am the God who is. I heard your voice as we hear voices that speak to our hearts. And at once I had no cause to doubt. I was astonished that though I now loved you, I did not persist in the enjoyment of God. I was held back by mere trifles. They plucked at my garment of flesh and whispered, are you going to dismiss us? I could see the beauty of continence, and I had to look at it, that self-restraint from lust and sex. I could see the beauty of continence. In all her serene and unsullied joy, she stretched out her loving hands to welcome and embrace me. He found himself one day in a battle, because he didn't just have this one-day conversion. He was in a battle for years, and he had a concubine, and they had a child. Anyway, he was in this battle one day, and he's like with the Lord, this flesh and spirit thing going on. And he said he caught it. I was dying, but later realized really God was bringing him to life. I heard a sing-song voice of a child nearby that was saying, take it and read, take it and read, take it and read. There was a little girl saying that in the house next, but he applied it to the Lord speaking through her. Take it and read, take it and read. And he picked up the scriptures, and he flipped open the Bible to Romans. He flipped it. The first thing he saw was Romans 3:13 and 14, which says this, not in reveling and drunkenness, not in lust and wantonness, not in quarrels and rivalries. Rather, arm yourselves with the Lord Jesus Christ. Spend no more thought on nature and nature's appetites. From that moment on, he took a pursuit of uncovering grace, converting grace, and purity. He became a monk. He walked in a life of celibacy. But he believed this, God's grace is God giving us a sovereign joy in God that triumphs over all the other joys. Because we're all looking for this thing that brings joy to our lives. And he believed that I cannot conjure that up in and of myself. If I could conjure up a desire for that which does not dwell within me, it's impossible. It's because God takes occupancy within me, and he gives me that desire for him, to experience him in joy above all the other silly joys that are out there for me to grab hold of. His doctrine of delight is the root of all Christian living. I had two guys call me, one Friday, one Saturday, guys that have graduated here, and guys that aren't doing well right now. And as I discussed this with them, I realized that they don't delight in the Lord. It's like every moment that we're in, we have this choice that we can embrace this idea of idolatry, and whatever that looks like for us individually, and this joy that we might get, or this pleasure, this fleeting moment of pleasure, or grabbing hold of this triumphant joy, this joy in God above all else, this delight. Idolatry or delight? Do I have that? Seeing and knowing God, experiencing him. Psalm 16:11 says this, you make known to me the path of life. You will fill me with joy in your presence, with eternal pleasures at your right hand. Do you delight? Do I delight? I'm going to pray for his Spirit to captivate our hearts, because without that, I don't know if I can ever get to the place he's talking about.